Boy, do I wish our gospel said that, right? What a sordid and terrible tale in today's gospel. And I'm not even talking about this week's news, right? I could list a whole bunch of years where we know what has happened in today's gospel is something that happened in the news, where corruption goes awry and someone dies. Now, gospel, I said that word, and that's the story. And gospel means good news. But is there any good news in today's gospel? I heard no. Did you even hear Jesus in today's gospel? He's not even on the scene. There's no good news. Well, let's see what there is, though. Now, Mark has written this really long story. Now, if you know we've been journeying through Mark, and the one thing about Mark is that Mark is very precise, very quick. He uses the word immediate all the time. His stories are short. This one is not. And there are echoes of other stories that are yet to come and stories that have been. And what I'm going to do, which makes this story really complex, and what I'm going to do is kind of lift the complexity so you can see what Mark might be getting at. Now, his first listeners would have known these stories by heart, would have known the context, would have quickly come to some of these things that I'll point out today. But we, so far from when it was written and in a completely different culture, and maybe not know our Bible as much as the first listeners do, it makes it a little hard to see. Now, Herod, he is remembering what he did to John. As a matter of fact, he's a little paranoid about it because he's like, maybe Jesus is John that's come back from the dead. And I'm sure that John would have a lot to say to Herod, right? He might be a little worried there. Now, he is the grandson of the Herod we hear about when Jesus is born. And he has been given just a little bit of the kingdom, just a quarter of it. And so he has great ambitions to reunite the kingdom. And so he wants to be the king of the Jews and a friend of Caesar, a Roman, right? And so he does this a couple of ways. He does great big building campaigns and redoes towns and names them after emperors of Rome. He also builds his alliances through his marriages. The Arabic princess, he married an Arabic princess before the person we hear about today's story. She was an alliance that was really important at one point and then not so important after a different point. And as soon as she became dispensable, he divorced her and exiled her from the kingdom. Now, how do we know this? We know this from a historian named Josephus who wrote about that time and has parallels to Mark's stories. And so, he married his brother's wife. That's not uncommon in the Bible. But here's the thing that is uncommon. His brother was still alive. So he essentially fell in love with his brother's wife. They divorced. He married her. And so that's what John was talking about. This is an unholy marriage. You broke up a marriage. Now, he's not just talking about the marriage. He's also talking about the alliance between Caesar and the Jewish faith and people. That is an unholy alliance. Why? Because of the corruption and greed that is so incredibly present in today's story. There is no good news in that. It's just corruption and greed. And this poor girl who gets used as a pawn, essentially, and she is amazing all of the people who she's entertaining through her dancing, and the king, Herod, bestows her a power. Do you remember the power he said? Ask me anything. I will even grant you half of my kingdom. Now that is a phrase from a different story. I will grant you half of my kingdom is a story from Esther. where it says over and over and over again. Now, Esther is a woman who became queen and was Jewish, and she used to, with her charm and wit, really entertain the king and convinced him to essentially save the Jewish people. Because he would ask, what do you want me to give? And she said, save my people. So these two stories are about incredible, powerful, and not so powerful people who receive this choice to be one of liberation and freedom, or one of death and destruction. And I think that's the heart of today's gospel, that we, as Jesus' disciples, are given this choice in our everyday lives: to rule Caesar or to rule God. Sounds simple at the surface, doesn't it? Just a few weeks ago, we talked about how Jesus entered his hometown. And do anyone remember the reception Jesus got? Was it good? Was he brought in, enjoyed? No, it was not good. As a matter of fact, there was a wall of resistance that Jesus wasn't even able to perform as many miracles as Jesus could because of that wall of resistance. I think that's about our choice of being a vessel for God's love or a wall of resistance. That choice that we all have. It sounds so simple again. We are called to choose love and light. With everyone we meet, we are to hold that person in love and light. Now, we all know that that is almost an impossible task to do, right? Even though we might have learned that in kindergarten, that we should take care of each other and love each other, we know some people are hard to love. Hard at times even to see them as equals, to see their humanity when the humanity looks like it is gone. In the past few weeks, in the past few sermons, I've been talking about something called a dignity scale. It is a scale moving from 1 to 8 about how we treat each other in our public and private lives, on how much respect we give and see the dignity in everyone, or how little we give. And that our culture and our country and our world is really gearing downward in the wrong direction. But here's the thing about dignity. It is primal in our instincts, right? That desire to be treated with dignity. And that if we remove that dignity, the resistance and the things that happen, divorce, war, revolution, are huge. But if we respect that dignity, the opposite is true. Make those choices, Caesar or God. It sounds simple, right? It isn't. This past week, it has been incredibly hard to be part of the news and the nation and not consume words that aren't about dignity and love. But here's the thing, we have the power to move that scale just in our own actions, just in what we consume, by who we around us consume, by talking about, you know what, that isn't right. And here's why it's not right. It's not respecting someone's dignity. These teeny tiny steps can move our community here at St. Paul's and Walnut Creek and the larger nation towards light and love. Here is a quote from the Washington Post from a lobbyist. He says, there are only two engines that drive Washington. One is greed and one is fear. Right? That's a false choice. That's a false choice. There's no Jesus in that story, right? Just as there's no Jesus in the gospel. We can bring that love that Jesus talks about. So that this story from the walnut, from Washington isn't our story. What a sordid and terrible tale in the gospel. I wonder what tale we'll tell because of the love present in this room and the love that we spread and share with everyone we know. Amen.